I ain't afraid of dyin', stranger, but I'll be damned if I let you take my name with me." The words hung in the air like smoke over a dying fire, sharp and defiant, cutting through the relentless howl of the Wyoming wind. They came from a man half buried in the shadow of a jagged canyon wall, his face obscured by a tattered hat and a beard matted with blood and dust. His left hand clutched a Colt revolver, its barrel trembling but pointed straight at Clara Voss's heart. She stood 30 feet away, her own rifle steady, her boots planted firm in the red dirt that seemed to bleed beneath the twilight sky. The man's eyes wild, desperate, and glittering with something deeper than fear told her he wasn't bluffing. He'd shoot if she moved, and she'd shoot if he did. Clara had been tracking him for 3 days across the high plains, through sagebrush and alkali flats, where the sun burned hotter than hell's own forge and the nights froze your bones to brittle glass. His trail had been sloppy at first, broken branches, hoofprints too deep for a man in a hurry to hide, but it had grown clever as the miles stretched on, as if he'd remembered how to vanish into the land itself. She'd found his horse dead yesterday, its legs broken in a gopher hole, its rider long gone on foot. Most trackers would have turned back, called it a lost cause. But Clara Voss wasn't most trackers. She'd chased ghosts before, and this man, whoever he was, wasn't half as slippery as the ones that haunted her dreams. The canyon where they now faced each other was a maze of red rock and shadow, its walls carved by centuries of wind and forgotten rivers. It smelled of dust and iron, and somewhere high above, a hawk screamed, its cry echoing like a warning no one heeded. Clara's horse, a gray mare named Mercy, snorted softly behind her, tied to a stunted juniper that clung to life in the cracked earth. The man's shadow shifted as he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a rasp that carried the weight of a lifetime's worth of secrets. "You don't know what you're chassin', woman. Turn back now, or you'll wish you'd died out here with me." Clara's eyes narrowed, but her rifle didn't waver. She was 32 years old, with a face that had seen too many winters and not enough kindness. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, streaked with gray that hadn't been there 3 years ago, before the fire that took her sister and left her with nothing but a scar across her left cheek and a heart full of ash. She wore a man's duster, patched at the elbows, and a revolver hung low on her hip, its grip worn smooth by years of use. She'd tracked bounties from Denver to the Mexican border, but this job felt different. The wanted poster in her saddlebag called him Elias Kane, a thief and murderer who'd gunned down a stagecoach driver and stolen a strongbox full of gold. But the way he looked at her now, with eyes that seemed to see straight through her, made her wonder if the paper had told her the whole truth. "I know enough," she said, her voice steady as the rock beneath her feet. "You're worth $500, dead or alive, and I ain't in the habit of leaving a trail cold." Elias laughed, a dry, bitter sound that turned into a cough. Blood flecked his lips, and Clara noticed the dark stain spreading across his shirt, just below his ribs. He was hurt, bad, maybe from a fall, maybe from something worse. The buzzards circling overhead had noticed too, their wings cutting lazy arcs against the bruised purple sky. She could wait him out, let the desert do her work for her. But something about his words, about the way he'd said my name, gnawed at her, like he was protecting something more valuable than his life. She took a step forward, testing him. His gun hand twitched, but he didn't fire. "Not yet. Who are you really, Elias Kane?" she asked, her voice low, almost lost in the wind. "'Cause I'm starting to think you ain't just some road agent who got lucky with a stagecoach." His eyes flickered, and for a moment, she thought she saw something like recognition or maybe fear pass through them. "You're askin' questions that'll get you killed," he said. "This ain't about gold, and it ain't about me. You keep diggin', you'll find something you can't unsee." Before Clara could press him further, a new sound broke the silence, a low rumble, like distant thunder, but too steady, too deliberate. Hoof beats, coming fast from the north, where the canyon opened into a wide, dusty plain. Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. She didn't turn her head, didn't dare take her eyes off Elias, but her ears tracked the sound. At least 3 horses, maybe 4, moving with the kind of purpose that meant trouble. In this part of Wyoming, riders didn't come charging through canyons for friendly visits. They were either running from something or hunting it. Elias's gaze darted toward the sound, and his face changed. The defiance drained out of him, replaced by something colder, harder. "You got bigger problems than me now, Tracker," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're here." "Who?" Clara snapped, her finger tightening on the rifle's trigger. But Elias didn't answer. Instead, he did something that made her blood run cold. He lowered his gun, letting it hang loose at his side, and stared past her, toward the mouth of the canyon, like a man facing his own executioner. The hoofbeats grew louder, and now Clara could see them fur riders, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. They rode hard, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that glowed red in the sunset. Bandanas covered their faces, but their eyes were visible, glinting with the kind of hunger that belonged to men who'd killed before and would again. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man with a black hat tilted low, raised a hand, and the others slowed, fanning out to block the canyon's only exit. Clara's stomach twisted. She was caught between a wounded fugitive and a posse that didn't look like it was here to serve justice. "Clara Voss," the lead rider called, his voice muffled by the bandana but carrying a mocking edge. "You're a long way from Denver." Her name on his lips sent a jolt through her. She hadn't heard anyone speak it in weeks, not since she'd taken this job from a shady saloon owner in Cheyenne. Nobody out here was supposed to know her, not unless they'd been watching her, following her. She kept her rifle on Elias, but shifted her weight, ready to swing it toward the new threat if needed. "You got business with me, say it," she replied, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Otherwise, ride on." The leader laughed, a low, guttural sound that made the hairs on her neck stand up. "Oh, we got business, all right. You're chasing the wrong man, Tracker. Elias there ain't the prize you think he is." Clara's eyes flicked to Elias, who was still staring at the riders, his face unreadable. He wasn't moving, wasn't fighting, just standing there like a man who'd already accepted his fate. That wasn't the behavior of a common thief. Thieves ran, fought, begged. Elias Kane was doing none of those things, and it set her nerves on edge. "Then who is he?" she asked, directing the question at the leader, but keeping her gaze locked on Elias. "And what do you want with him?" The leader nudged his horse closer, close enough for Clara to see the glint of a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. But it wasn't a real starnet, the kind issued by any territorial office. She'd seen enough fakes in her time to recognize the cheap tin shine of a bought badge. "Let's just say Elias knows something he shouldn't," the man said. "Something worth more than that piddly bounty you're after. Hand him over, and maybe we let you walk away." Clara's mind raced. The wanted poster had mentioned a stagecoach robbery, a dead driver, a stolen strongbox. Standard outlaw work, nothing special. But these men weren't after gold. They were after Elias, and not for any crime listed on a poster. She thought about the blood on his shirt, the way he'd talked about his name, the cryptic warnings he'd given her. Whatever he was hiding, it was big enough to bring four armed men into a desolate canyon, and it was personal enough to make them know her name. Elias finally spoke, his voice low and steady despite the blood soaking his shirt. "Don't trust them, Clara. They ain't here for justice. They're here to bury a secret, and they'll bury you with it." The leader's horse snorted, and the man leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes narrowing above the bandana. "Last chance, Tracker. Drop the rifle, step away from Kane, and maybe you live to see tomorrow." Clara's jaw tightened. She'd been in standoffs before, faced down men with more guns and worse intentions. But this felt different. The air was thick with something heavier than the threat of violence, something like fate, or maybe doom. She could feel the weight of Elias's gaze on her, the weight of the rider's eyes, the weight of the dying light pressing down on the canyon like a lid on a coffin. She had seconds to decide, and every choice felt like a trap. If she handed Elias over, she might walk away, but she'd be leaving a wounded man to die and a mystery unsolved. If she fought, she'd be taking on for men with a rifle and a revolver that hadn't been cleaned in a week, with a fugitive who might turn on her the second her back was exposed. And if she did nothing, the buzzards circling above would have more than one body to pick clean before morning. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the faint sound of a child's cry from somewhere deeper in the rocks. Clara's heart stopped. A child, out here in this godforsaken place? The sound came again, faint but unmistakable, and it changed everything. Elias's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes widening with something like panic, and the leader's posture shifted, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. "Who else is out here?" Clara demanded, her rifle swinging toward the leader now, her voice sharp enough to cut through the growing tension. "You got a kid stashed somewhere in this canyon." The leader didn't answer, but one of his men, a weary figure with a scar across his forehead, muttered something under his breath and spurred his horse toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. Clara's instinct screamed at her to follow, but she couldn't take her eyes off the leader or Elias, not with guns drawn and tempers flaring. The child's cry came again, weaker this time, and it hit Clara like a bullet to the chest. She'd heard cries like that before, 3 years ago, when she'd pulled her sister's body from the ashes of their burned-out cabin. Too late to save her. "Talk, damn you," she said, her voice shaking with a fury she hadn't felt in years. "What's a child doing out here?" Elias spoke before the leader could, his words coming fast, like he knew time was running out. "They took her. A girl, no more'n 10. She's the reason I ran, the reason they're after me. She saw something she shouldn't have, same as me." The leader's eyes flashed with anger, and he yanked his bandana down, revealing a face pockmarked and weathered, with a cruel twist to his mouth. "Shut your damn mouth, Kane," he snarled. "You're only macking this harder." Clara's mind spun. A child witness, a fugitive who wasn't what he seemed, a posse that wasn't a posse. The pieces didn't fit, not yet, but they were starting to form a picture, and it was uglier than anything she'd expected. The child's cry came again, fainter now, and Clara made her choice. She didn't know Elias Kane, didn't trust him, didn't even like him. But that crithit small, desperate sound was something she couldn't ignore. She lowered her rifle just enough to look non-threatening, but her finger stayed near the trigger. "Here's how this goes," she said, her voice cold as the desert night that was creeping in. "We find that girl right now. Then we talk about who walks away and who doesn't." The leader laughed, but it was a nervous sound, and his men shifted uneasily in their saddles. Elias, still clutching his side, gave her a look that was half gratitude, half warning. "You're stepping into a storm, Clara Voss," he said. "Hope you're ready for what's comin'." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and blood, and somewhere in the canyon, the child's cry faded into silence. Clara didn't know if she was walking toward salvation or damnation. But she knew one thing for certain, she wasn't turning back. The riders moved first, the leader barking an order that sent the scarred man deeper into the crevice, where the child's cry had come from. Clara's instinct screamed at her to follow, but she couldn't leave Elias exposed, not with the leader and his 2 remaining men still watching her, like wolves circling a wounded deer. The canyon felt smaller now, its walls pressing in as the last light bled from the sky, leaving only the cold glow of a rising moon to illuminate the scene. Mercy snorted behind her, sensing the tension, and Clara wished she could spare a moment to calm the mare. But moments were a luxury she didn't have. Elias staggered to his feet, his gun still hanging loose in his hand, but his eyes were sharp, tracking the rider's movements with the precision of a man who'd survived too many ambushes to count. "They won't let her go," he said, his voice low enough that only Clara could hear. "Not alive." She saw their faces, same as I did. Clara's jaw clenched. She didn't know what this girl had witnessed, but she'd seen enough of the world to know that men like these didn't leave loose ends. She thought of her sister, of the flames that had swallowed their home, of the promises she'd made to herself never to let another innocent die on her watch. But promises were fragile things in a place like this, where the land itself seemed to conspire against the living. "Stay put," she told Elias, her voice sharp. "You try to run, I'll put a bullet in your leg before they do." He gave her a crooked smile, blood staining his teeth. "Wouldn't dream of it, tracker. You're the only thing keeping me breathin' right now." The leader was watching them, his hand resting on his pistol, his eyes flicking between Clara and the crevice where his man had disappeared. The other 2 riders had dismounted, their rifles drawn, positioning themselves to cover both exits of the canyon. Clara's mind raced through her options. She could shoot the leader now, take her chances with the others, but that would leave the child's fate uncertain. She could try to negotiate, but men like these didn't bargain with women they planned to kill. Or she could follow the scarred man, find the girl, and hope she could get her out before the shooting started. The decision was made for her when a scream tore through the night, not the child's this time, but a man's, raw and panicked, coming from the crevice. The leader's head snapped toward the sound, and for a split second, his attention left Clara. That was all she needed. She swung her rifle toward the crevice and sprinted, her boots pounding the dirt, her heart hammering in her chest. Behind her, she heard the leader shout, heard the click of a hammer being cocked, but she didn't look back. The crevice was narrow, barely wide enough for a horse, its walls jagged and sharp, cutting into her shoulders as she squeezed through. The scream came again, weaker now, and then silence heavy and ominous. She emerged into a small clearing, a pocket in the canyon where the moonlight barely reached. The scarred rider lay sprawled in the dirt, his throat slit, his eyes staring blankly at the stars. Blood pooled beneath him, black in the dim light, and his rifle lay useless a few feet away. Clara's breath caught. Whoever had done this was fast, silent, and close. A rustle in the shadows made her swing her rifle up, her finger tight on the trigger. "Show yourself," she said, her voice low but steady. "I ain't here to play games." A figure stepped into the moonlight, small and trembling, her dress torn and her face streaked with dirt. The girl couldn't have been more than 10, her dark hair tangled, her eyes wide with terror. She held a knife in her shaking hands, its blade slick with blood. Clara's heart lurched. This child had just killed a man, and the weight of it was already breaking her. "Easy, girl," Clara said, lowering her rifle but keeping it ready. "I ain't gonna hurt you. What's your name?" The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, in a whisper so faint it was almost lost in the wind, she said, "Leela." Clara nodded, keeping her movements slow, deliberate. "Leela, I'm Clara. I'm gonna get you out of here, but you gotta trust me. Can you do that?" Lila's eyes darted toward the crevice, toward the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The others were coming. Clara grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her behind a boulder just as the leader and his men burst into the clearing. They saw the scarred man's body and froze, their faces twisting with rage. "Where is she?" the leader roared, his pistol sweeping the shadows. "You can't hide her forever, Voss." Clara pressed Leela against the rock, her hand over the girl's mouth to keep her quiet. The child was shaking so hard Clara could feel it through her own body, but she didn't make a sound. Brave, Clara thought, braver than most grown men she'd met. She leaned close, whispering in Lila's ear, "Stay here. Don't move, don't make a sound. I'll come back for you." Lila's eyes were wide, but she nodded, clutching the knife like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Clara slipped back into the clearing, her rifle raised, her heart pounding so loud she was sure they could hear it. The leader's eyes locked onto her, and his pistol swung up, but she was faster. Her shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls, and the leader's hat flew off as the bullet grazed his scalp. He staggered back, cursing, but didn't fall. "You're making a mistake, tracker," he snarled, blood trickling down his temple. "You don't know what you're protecting." "Then tell me," Clara said, her voice cold as steel, "what's a little girl worth to you? What's Elias Kane worth?" The leader wiped the blood from his face, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and something else of fear, maybe, or desperation. "You think you're savin' her. You're signin' her death warrant. And yours." Before Clara could respond, a new sound cut through the night, a low, guttural chant, rising from the shadows beyond the clearing. It wasn't English, wasn't any language Clara recognized, but it sent a chill down her spine. The leader's men froze, their rifles swinging toward the sound, and even the leader's bravado faltered. Clara's eyes darted to the shadows, where shapes were moving, dull, lean figures, their faces painted with symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Cheyenne warriors, at least 5 of them, armed with bows and rifles, their movements silent and precise. Clara's heart sank. She'd dealt with Cheyenne before, traded with them, even earned their respect once by saving a hunter from a bear trap. But these weren't traders. These were warriors, and the way they moved suggested they weren't here to talk. The leader's voice cracked as he shouted, "This ain't your fight, savages. Ride on, or we'll bury you with her." The chant stopped, and a single warrior stepped forward. his face painted with streaks of red and black, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He carried a rifle, but it was the knife at his belt that drew Clara's attention, a blade carved with symbols that matched the ones on his face. He spoke in halting English, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a storm. "White men steal children. White men lie. This canyon belongs to the people. You do not." Clara's mind raced. The Cheyenne, the riders, Elias, Lila, all of them were pieces in a puzzle she didn't understand. But every instinct told her the truth was buried deeper than gold or blood. She glanced back toward the boulder where Lila was hiding, her heart twisting at the thought of the girl alone, terrified, clutching a bloody knife. She had to get her out, had to keep her alive. But the odds were stacking against her like rocks in a landslide. "Elias," she called, her voice echoing through the clearing. "If you know something, now's the time to spill it." Elias staggered into the clearing, his gun still in his hand, his face pale as death. "They're after a map," he said, his voice hoarse. "A map to something buried out here, something worth more than any strongbox. The girl's pa found it, and they killed him for it." She saw where they hid it. The leader's face twisted with rage, and he raised his pistol, but the Cheyenne warrior was faster. An arrow flew from the shadows, striking the leader's hand and sending the gun spinning into the dirt. He screamed, clutching his wrist, as the other riders opened fire, their bullets kicking up dust and ricocheting off the canyon walls. Clara dove for cover, dragging Elias with her, her rifle barking as she returned fire. The clearing erupted into chouse gunshots, shouts, the twang of bowstrings, and the screams of horses. Clara's world narrowed to the moment, to the weight of her rifle, the burn of gunpowder in her lungs, the need to keep Lila alive. She didn't know what this map was, didn't know why it was worth killing a child for. But she knew one thing: she wasn't letting these men take another innocent life. As the fight raged, she caught a glimpse of the Cheyenne warrior watching her, his eyes unreadable. Was he an ally or another enemy? She didn't know, but she had a feeling the answer would decide whether any of them lived to see the dawn. The canyon was a graveyard of echoes, the gunfire fading into a ringing silence that pressed against Clara Voss's ears. Like a physical weight, she crouched behind a jagged boulder, her rifle hot in her hands, her breath ragged with the sharp tang of gunpowder. Elias Kane lay beside her, his blood-soaked shirt sticking to his ribs, his eyes half closed but still burning with a stubborn will to live. Somewhere in the shadows, Lila, the 10-year-old girl with a bloody knife and a secret worth killing for, huddled behind another rock, her small form invisible, but her presence heavy as a storm cloud in Clara's mind. The clearing was a slaughterhouse. The leader of the riders, his hand pierced by a Cheyenne arrow, had scrambled behind a fallen horse, his curses muffled by the dust still settling from the firefight. One of his men lay dead, a bullet through his chest. Clara's shot, clean and final. The other, the weary one with nervous eyes, had fled into the crevice, his horse screaming as a Cheyenne arrow found its flank. The Cheyenne warriors, 5 of them, had melted back into the shadows, their painted faces and silent movements making them seem more like spirits than men. But Clara knew they were still there, watching, waiting, their rifles and bows ready to turn this canyon into a tomb. She risked a glance at Elias, whose breathing was shallow, each exhale a wet rasp that told her he didn't have much time. "You still with me, Kane?" she whispered, her voice low to avoid drawing attention. His eyes fluttered open, and he managed a grim nod. "Barely. You got a plan, tracker, or we just waiting for the vultures?" Clara didn't answer right away. Her plan, if you could call it that, was to keep Lila alive, get her out of this canyon, and figure out why a 10-year-old girl and a half-dead fugitive were worth a posse of killers. And a Cheyenne war party. The map Elias had mentioned had a map to something buried. Something valuable enough to spill blood over was the key, but it was also a chain around her neck, dragging her deeper into a mess she hadn't asked for. She thought of her sister, of the fire that had taken her, of the promises she'd made to never let another innocent die. Those promises felt like stones in her chest now, heavy and unyielding. "Lila," she called softly, her voice just loud enough to carry to the girl's hiding spot. "You still there, girl?" A faint rustle answered, and then Lila's voice, small but steady, came from behind the boulder. I'm here. I ain't runnin'. Clara's heart twisted. The girl's courage was a knife, cutting through the fear that threatened to choke her. Good, she said. Stay put. I'm comin' for you soon. The leader's voice broke the moment, harsh and desperate from behind his barricade of horseflesh. Voss, you can't hide forever. Give us the girl, and we'll let you walk. Clara's lips curled into a sneer. She'd heard that lie before, from men just like him who thought a woman alone was easy prey. She shifted her grip on the rifle, her eyes scanning the shadows for the Cheyenne. They hadn't fired since the initial volley, which meant they were either biding their time or had their own reasons for holding back. She didn't know if they were allies or enemies, but she knew one thing in this canyon. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Elias, she said, keeping her voice low. That map, what's it lead to? And don't give me riddles. I need the truth, or we're all dead. Elias coughed, blood flecking his lips, and leaned his head back against the rock. It's a mine, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Silver, maybe more. Old Spanish claim, lost for a century. Lila's pa was a prospector, found a journal in a trader's wagon maps, coordinates, all of it. He hid it before they killed him. The girl knows where. Clara's mind raced. A silver mine explained the greed, the bloodlust. The fake sheriff's star pinned to the leader's vest. Men had killed for less out here, where the land was as unforgiving as the people who fought over it. But a child as the only witness? That was a complication, a loose end these men would never let live. She thought of Lila, alone with her knife, her small hands stained with a man's blood. No child should carry that weight. But Clara knew better than most that the frontier didn't care about shoulds. Before she could press Elias further, a shadow moved in the corner of her vision, a Cheyenne warrior. The one with the painted face and the carved knife, slipping through the crevice like smoke. He didn't look at her, didn't raise his rifle, but his presence was a warning, a reminder that this fight wasn't just hers. She tightened her grip on her rifle, her eyes flicking between the warrior and the leader's barricade. Voss, the leader shouted again, his voice cracking with frustration. You're macking this harder than it needs to be. Hand over the girl, and we'll split the claim. You'll be rich. Clara's laugh was cold, bitter, cutting through the night like a blade. Rich? You think I'm out here for money? You don't know me at all. She stood, her rifle raised, and stepped into the moonlight, exposing herself just enough to draw their attention. It was a risk, maybe a stupid one, but she needed to shift the balance, to force the leader to make a move. Behind her, she heard Elias's a warning, but she ignored it. The Cheyenne warrior watched from the shadows, his eyes unreadable, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. Here's my offer, she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. You ride out now, leave the girl, and I don't hunt you down like the dogs you are. That's the only deal you're gettin'. The leader laughed, but it was a nervous sound, and his remaining man shifted uneasily, his rifle wavering. You're outnumbered, Voss, the leader said, and outgunned. You think those savages are gonna help you? They'll cut your throat same as ours. The Cheyenne warrior spoke then, his voice calm but edged with steel. White man speaks with a forked tongue. The girl belongs to no one. The canyon decides her fate. Clara's heart pounded. The Cheyenne weren't here for her, or for Elias, or even for the map. They were here for their own reasons, and that made them unpredictable. She thought of the stories she'd heard Cheyenne warriors protecting their sacred lands, their people, their secrets. This canyon, with its hidden crevices and ancient carvings, might be more than just a battlefield. It might be a place of power, a place worth dying for. Before she could respond, a new sound broke the stalmatia low, guttural growl, not human, not animal, but something in between. It came from deeper in the canyon, where the shadows were thickest, and it sent a shiver down Clara's spine. The leader's man froze, his rifle dropping slightly, and even the Cheyenne warrior tensed, his hand tightening on his knife. What the hell was that? The leader muttered, his voice shaking. Clara didn't know, but she'd heard stories, whispers in saloons about things that lived in the wild places, things that weren't man or beast but something older, hungrier. She'd never believed them, not really, but the sound crawling out of the darkness made her question every certainty she'd ever had. Lila, she called, her voice urgent now. You hear that? You stay where you are. You hear me?" No answer came, and Clara's stomach twisted. She glanced at Elias, who was struggling to sit up, his face pale as death. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's them. The ones who guard it." "Guard what?" Clara snapped, her patience fraying. "The mine," he said. "It's not just silver. There's something else. Something they don't want found." The growl came again, closer now, and Clara's blood ran cold. She didn't know what Elias was talking about, didn't want to know. But she knew one thing. She had to get Leela out of this canyon before whatever was making that sound found them. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and grabbed Elias, hauling him to his feet despite his groan of pain. "Move," she said, dragging him toward the boulder where Leela was hiding. "We're getting her, and we're getting out." But as they reached the boulder, Clara's heart stopped. Leela was gone. The knife lay in the dirt, its blade still wet with blood, but the girl was nowhere to be seen. Clara's knees buckled, and for a moment, she was back in that burning cabin, watching her sister's life slip away. She shook it off, forcing herself to focus, but the fear was a living thing, clawing at her chest. "Leela," she shouted, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Leela, where are you?" A faint cry answered, not from the crevice but from deeper in the canyon, where the growl had come from. Clara's blood turned to ice. The girl had run, terrified, straight toward whatever was waiting in the shadows. Clara turned to Elias, her eyes blazing. "You know what's out there. Tell me now." Elias's face was gray, his breathing ragged, but he met her gaze. "It's not a what, it's a who. The Guardians, old ones, tied to the land. They protect the mine, and they don't care who dies to keep it hidden." Clara didn't have time to process that. The leader was moving now, shouting orders to his remaining man, and the Cheyenne warriors were circling closer, their rifles raised. The growl came again, louder, closer, and Clara knew they were out of time. She grabbed Elias's arm, pulling him toward the sound of Lila's cry, her rifle ready in her other hand. "Stay with me," she told him, her voice fierce. "You die, you take your secrets with you, and I'll be damned if I let that happen." They moved through the crevice, the walls narrowing until they had to turn sideways to pass. The moonlight barely reached here, and the air was thick with the smell of damp stone and something else, something metallic, like blood but older, sharper. Clara's heart pounded, but she kept moving, driven by the memory of Lila's terrified eyes, by the promise she'd made to herself to never fail another child. The crevice opened into another clearing, smaller, darker, its walls carved with symbols that seemed to pulse in the faint light. Leela stood in the center, frozen, her eyes wide with terror. Before her, 3 figures stood tall, cloaked in shadows, their faces hidden, but their presence radiating a cold, ancient malice. They weren't Cheyenne, weren't riders, weren't anything Clara had ever seen. Their eyes glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire, and the growl came from them, low and guttural, a sound that made her skin crawl. "Leela," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "Come to me, slow and easy." The girl's head turned, but she didn't move, her body trembling. One of the figures raised a hand, and Clara saw it wasn't a hand at all, but something twisted, claw-like, glinting in the moonlight. Elias gasped behind her, his voice a broken whisper. "The Guardians. They're real." Clara didn't know what they were, didn't care. All she knew was that Leela was in danger, and she wasn't leaving this canyon without her. She raised her rifle, aiming at the nearest figure, her voice cold as the night. "Let her go, or I swear I'll put a bullet through whatever passes for your heart." The figure's head tilted, and the growl deepened, vibrating in her chest. Behind her, she heard the sound of hoofbeats, the leader and his man, coming fast. The Cheyenne were there too, their chants rising again, a counterpoint to the Guardian's growl. The canyon was a powder keg, and Clara was standing on the fuse. She took a step forward, her rifle steady, her eyes locked on Leela. "You're comin' with me, girl," she said. "Ain't nobody takin' you from me." Lila's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Clara saw something in them, hope, maybe, or trust. Then the girl moved, darting toward Clara, and the Guardians lunged, their claws slashing through the air. Clara fired, the shot deafening in the confined space, and one of the figures staggered, black ichor spilling from its chest. But it didn't fall, didn't stop, and Clara knew this wasn't a fight she could win with bullets. The leader burst into the clearing, his pistol raised, his face twisted with rage. "Kill them all," he shouted, and his men opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the walls. The Cheyenne warriors answered with a volley of arrows, and the air was thick with chaos screams. Gunshots, the unearthly growl of the guardians. Clara grabbed Leela, pulling her behind a rock, her body shielding the girl as the world erupted around them. Elias was on his knees, his gun empty, his strength fading. "The map," he gasped. "It's in her locket. Herpa's locket. Get it, Clara. It's the only way." Clara's hand went to Lila's neck, where a small silver locket hung, its surface scratched but intact. She didn't know what it meant, didn't know why it was worth all this death. But she knew one thing. She had to get Lila out, had to keep her alive, had to find the truth. She tore the locket free, tucking it into her pocket, and pulled Lila to her feet. "Run," she said, her voice fierce. "We're getting out of here." They ran, dodging bullets and arrows, the guardians' growls chasing them through the dark. The Cheyenne warriors were fighting the riders now, their chants rising like a storm. And Clara didn't know if they were allies or just another threat. All she knew was that she had Lila, and she wasn't letting go. They reached the edge of the clearing, the crevice looming ahead, but the guardians were close, their claws scraping the stone. Clara turned, firing blindly, and one of them fell, its body dissolving into shadow. But the others kept coming, and the riders were closing in, their bullets tearing chunks from the canyon walls. "Clara!" Lila screamed, her voice raw with fear. Clara spun, her rifle empty, her revolver drawn. The leader was there, his pistol aimed at her heart, his face twisted with triumph. "You're done, Voss," he said. "Give me the locket." She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She fired, the bullet taking him in the shoulder, and he staggered back, his shot going wide. Lila screamed again, and Clara turned to see a guardian looming over them, its claws raised. She threw herself over Lila, bracing for the impact, but it never came. A Cheyenne arrow struck the guardian, piercing its chest, and it collapsed, its body crumbling like ash. The warrior with the painted face stood at the edge of the clearing, his bow still raised, his eyes meeting Clara's. "Go," he said. "Take the girl. The canyon is not yours." Clara didn't argue. She grabbed Lila's hand and ran, Elias staggering behind them, the locket burning a hole in her pocket. The crevice was tight, the walls scraping her skin, but she pushed through, her heart pounding, her mind racing. They emerged into the open canyon, where Mercy waited, her eyes wide with fear but her body steady. Clara lifted Lila onto the mare, then helped Elias, his weight heavy against her. "Hold on," she said, swinging into the saddle. "We're ridden hard." She spurred Mercy forward, the horse leaping into a gallop, the canyon blurring around them. The sounds of the fight faded, but the growls of the guardians echoed in her mind, a reminder that whatever they'd escaped wasn't finished with them. The locket in her pocket felt heavier than it should, a weight of secrets she didn't yet understand. They rode for hours, the moon high above, the plains stretching endless before them. Lila clung to Clara's waist, her small body trembling but alive. Elias slumped against her back, his breathing shallow but steady. Clara didn't know where they were going, didn't know what the locket held. But she knew one thing. She'd made a promise to Lila, and she'd die before she broke it. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of gold and blood, Clara saw a shape on the horizon, a small cabin, its chimney smoking faintly. It wasn't hers, wasn't anyone she knew, but it was shelter, and that was enough for now. She slowed Mercy, her eyes scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. The riders were gone, the Cheyenne were gone, the guardians were gone. But Clara knew better than to think they were safe. She dismounted, helping Lila and Elias down, her hands gentle despite the ache in her muscles. The locket was still in her pocket, its secrets unopened, its weight a reminder of the storm they'd ridden into. She looked at Lila, whose eyes were still wide with fear, but also something else to trust, maybe, or hope. "We're gonna figure this out," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. "You hear me, Lila? We're gonna find out what this is all about, and we're gonna keep you safe." Lila nodded, her small hand clutching Clara's. Elias coughed, his eyes meeting Clara's with a look that said he knew more than he was telling. "You opened that locket yet?" he asked, his voice weak but sharp. Clara shook her head. "Not yet, but I will." She led them toward the cabin, her rifle ready, her heart heavy with promises and secrets. The dust of forgotten trails clung to her boots, and the wind carried the faint echo of a growl, a reminder that some things never stayed buried. The cabin door creaked like a warning, its rusted hinges groaning under the weight of years. Clara Voss stood in the threshold, her rifle cradled in her arms, her eyes scanning the dim interior for threats that might be hiding in the shadows. Leela clung to her side, the 10-year-old's small hand gripping Clara's duster, her face pale but resolute despite the horrors they'd fled in the canyon. Elias Kane slumped against the wall outside, his breath a wet rattle, his blood-soaked shirt a grim reminder that time was bleeding away, faster than the dawn light creeping over the Wyoming plains. The locket in Clara's pocket felt like a stone, heavy with secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover. But the faint smoke curling from the cabin's chimney told her they weren't alone, and that meant danger, or maybe salvation. "Stay close," Clara whispered to Leela, her voice low but steady, "and keep that knife ready." Leela nodded, her fingers tightening around the blade she'd used to kill a man in the canyon. The memory of Edolf, the girl's trembling hands slick with blood, twisted Clara's gut. But there was no time for softness. Not yet. She stepped inside, her boots thudding softly on the warped wooden floor, her senses sharp as a blade. The air smelled of wood smoke and old leather, with a faint metallic tang that set her nerves on edge. A single lantern flickered on a rough-hewn table, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the walls. A figure sat in the corner, half hidden in the gloom, a rifle resting across their knees. "Who's there?" Clara called, her voice cutting through the silence like a gunshot. "Show yourself, or I start shootin'." The figure shifted, leaning forward into the lantern's glow. It was a woman, older than Clara, her face weathered like the canyon walls, her gray hair braided tight against her scalp. Her eyes were sharp, unyielding, the kind that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. She wore a patchwool coat and a silver ring on her left hand, its surface etched with symbols that reminded Clara of the carvings in the canyon. The woman's rifle didn't move, but her gaze flit from Clara to Leela, then to Elias, who'd staggered in behind them, leaning heavily on the doorframe. "You're a long way from anywhere, tracker," the woman said, her voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot, "and you brought trouble with you." Clara kept her rifle steady, her finger near the trigger. "Trouble found us," she said. "We need shelter, medical supplies. Got a girl here who's seen too much and a man who's dying. You gonna help, or we gotta do this the hard way?" The woman's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of something curiosity, maybe, or recognition when she looked at Leela. "That girl's carrying something heavy," she said. "Not just fear. What's in that locket, child?" Clara's hand instinctively went to her pocket, where the locket rested, its silver warm against her skin. She hadn't opened it yet, hadn't had the chance, but Elias's words in the canyon about a map, a silver mine, something older and darker echoed in her mind. She didn't trust this woman, didn't trust anyone. But the weight of Lila's gaze and Elias's fading strength forced her to make a choice. "Name's Clara Voss," she said, lowering her rifle just enough to show she wasn't looking for a fight. "This is Leela. That's Elias. We're running from men who want what's in that locket, and something else. Something that ain't human." The woman's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened on her rifle. "You met the Guardians," she said, not a question but a statement, her voice carrying the weight of someone who knew more than she was saying. "You're lucky to be breathin'." Clara's heart thudded. "You know about them." The woman stood, her movements slow but deliberate, and set her rifle against the wall. "Name's Hannah Crow," she said, "and I know more than you'd like. Sit. Your man needs patchin', and that girl needs water. Then we talk about that locket." Clara hesitated, her instinct screaming to keep moving, to trust no one. But Lila's trembling hand and Elias's labored breathing made the decision for her. She nodded, guiding Leela to a chair by the table, then helped Elias to a cot in the corner. His eyes were glassy, but he managed a weak grin. "You're a stubborn one, Voss," he muttered. Might just keep me alive out of spite. Shut up and lie still, Clara said, but there was no heat in her voice. She turned to Hannah, who was already pulling a tin box of medical supplies from a shelf. You got bandages, needle, thread. He's got a hole in him that needs clawsin'. Hannah nodded, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone who'd stitched up more than her share of wounds. As she worked on Elias, cleaning the gash in his side with whiskey and a steady hand, Clara sat beside Leela, pouring water from a canteen into a tin cup. The girl drank greedily, her small hands shaking, her eyes never leaving Clara's face. You're gonna be okay, Clara said, her voice soft but firm. I promised you that, and I don't break promises. Lila's lips trembled, but she nodded, clutching the cup like a lifeline. My pa, he said the locket was important, said it'd keep us safe. But it didn't. They killed him. They killed Ma. Clara's throat tightened. She thought of her sister, of the fire that had taken her, of the promises she'd made and broken. I'm gonna make it right, she said. But I need to know what's in that locket, Leela. Can you show me? Lila's hand went to her neck, where the locket had hung until Clara took it. She nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and trust. Clara pulled the locket from her pocket, its silver surface catching the lantern light. It was small, no bigger than a walnut, its edges worn smooth by years of handling. She hesitated, feeling the weight of it, not just the metal, but the secrets it held. Elias's words about the Guardians, about something older than silver, echoed in her mind. Whatever was inside, it was more than a map. She flicked the locket open, and a folded piece of parchment fell into her hand. Brittle and yellowed with age, she unfolded it carefully, revealing a crude map drawn in faded ink, a series of lines and symbols marking a path through the Wyoming wilderness, leading to a spot marked with a strange, spiral sigil. Below the map, in a spidery hand, were words in Spanish, La Puerta de los Muertos, the door of the dead. Clara's blood ran cold. She didn't speak Spanish fluently, but she'd heard enough in her years on the frontier to know those words weren't promising. She looked at Hannah, who'd finished stitching Elias and was watching her with those sharp, knowing eyes. You read Spanish? Clara asked, holding up the map. Hannah's lips pressed into a thin line. Enough to know you're holding something dangerous, she said. That ain't just a map to a mine. It's a key to something older, something the Cheyenne and others have guarded for centuries. The Guardians you met, they're tied to it. They don't protect silver. They protect what's behind that door. Clara's mind raced. The Guardians, those shadowy, clawed figures with glowing eyes, weren't human, weren't even close. She'd seen one fall to her bullet, its body dissolving into ash, but the others had kept coming. Relentless, driven by something she couldn't understand. What's behind the door? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Hannah shook her head. Nothing good. Stories say it's a place where the world thins, where the dead walk and the living don't come back. The Spanish found it, tried to claim it, and paid the price. The Cheyenne call it the Hollow, a place where spirits are trapped, angry, hungry. That map's a curse, and that girl's pa died for it. Lila's eyes filled with tears, and she buried her face in Clara's side. Clara wrapped an arm around her, her jaw tight. Then why's everyone after it? The Riders, the Guardians, even the Cheyenne? Hannah's gaze darkened. Power. Greed. The Riders want the silver, think the map leads to a fortune. The Guardians want it hidden, want it forgotten. The Cheyenne, they want it destroyed. And you, Clara Voss, you're in the middle of it, holding a key you don't understand. Before Clara could respond, a low growl rumbled through the cabin. Not from outside, but from beneath the floor, a sound that vibrated in her bones. Leela gasped, clutching Clara tighter, and Elias sat up, his face pale but his eyes sharp. They found us, he said, his voice hoarse. The Guardians. Hannah grabbed her rifle, her movements swift despite her age. They don't cross thresholds easy, she said. This place is warded, old Cheyenne magic in the walls. But it won't hold forever. You need to decide. Tracker. Open that door, or destroy the map. Clara's hand tightened around the parchment. Destroying it might end this, might keep Leela safe, but it would leave questions unanswered. Secrets buried. Opening the door, finding the hollow, might give her the truth. But at what cost? She looked at Leela, at the trust in her eyes, and felt the weight of her promise like a chain around her heart. The growl came again, louder, and the lantern flickered, casting wild shadows across the room. Clara stood, pulling Leela to her feet, her rifle ready. "We're not staying here," she said. "If those things are comin', we move. Now." Hannah nodded, grabbing a satchel from the corner. "There's a trail out back, leads to a river. Follow it north, it'll take you to a Cheyenne camp. They'll know what to do with that map." Clara hesitated, her eyes flicking to Elias. "Can you walk?" He grinned, blood staining his teeth. "Ain't got a choice, do I?" They moved fast, Hannah leading the way through a back door into the cold dawn air. The plains stretched endless before them, the river a silver thread in the distance. Mercy was still tethered outside, her ears pricked, sensing the danger. Clara lifted Leela onto the mare, then helped Elias, her muscles screaming with the effort. The growl followed them, a relentless shadow, and as they rode, Clara felt the locket in her pocket, the map burning a hole in her mind. The trail was rough, winding through sagebrush and rocky outcrops, the river growing closer with every step. But the growls didn't stop, and soon, Clara saw them shapes in the distance, moving fast, their forms blurring like smoke. The Guardians were coming, and they weren't alone. Hoofbeats thundered behind them, and Clara's heart sank as she recognized the sound. The riders, or what was left of them, hadn't given up. "Keep moving," she shouted, spurring Mercy forward. Leela clung to her, her small body trembling, and Elias gripped the saddle, his strength fading. Hannah ran beside them, her rifle ready, her face grim but determined. The river came into view, its banks lined with cottonwoods, their leaves whispering in the wind. A Cheyenne camp was visible in the distance, its fires glowing like beacons. Clara's hope flared, but it was short-lived. The Guardians were closer now, their growls a chorus of hunger, and the riders were gaining, their shouts carrying over the plains. Clara reined in Mercy, turning to face the threat. "Hannah, take Leela," she said, her voice hard. "Get her to the camp." Hannah's eyes widened. "You can't fight them alone." "I ain't alone," Clara said, glancing at Elias, who'd drawn his revolver despite his trembling hands. "Go. Now." Hannah hesitated, then nodded, grabbing Lila's hand and pulling her toward the river. Lila's eyes met Clara's, wide with fear but burning with trust. "You promised," she whispered. "I know," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I'm keeping it." As Hannah and Leela ran, Clara turned to face the Guardians and the riders, her rifle raised, her heart steady despite the fear. The Guardians were first, 3 of them, their clawed forms emerging from the dust, their eyes glowing like embers. Clara fired, the shot ringing out, and one fell, its body dissolving into ash. But the others kept coming, faster, their growls shaking the earth. The riders arrived seconds later, only to now, their faces twisted with rage. The leader, his hand bandaged from the arrow wound, raised his pistol. "You're dead, Voss," he shouted. "You and that map." Clara didn't answer. She fired again, taking the second rider in the chest, and he fell from his horse lifeless. The leader screamed, his pistol barking, and a bullet grazed Clara's arm, hot pain searing her skin. She didn't flinch, didn't stop, her revolver drawn now, firing with a precision born of years on the frontier. Elias fought beside her, his shots wild but effective, keeping the Guardians at bay. "The map," he shouted. "Burn it, Clara. It's the only way." Clara's hand went to her pocket, the parchment crumpled but intact. Burning it would end this, would stop the Guardians, maybe stop the riders. But it would also bury the truth, leave Lila's parents' deaths unanswered, leave the hollow a mystery. She thought of her sister, of the fire, of the promises she'd broken. She couldn't fail Lila, couldn't let her carry the weight of this alone. She made her choice. Drawing the map from her pocket, she held it up, the wind catching its edges. The Guardians froze, their growls fading, their eyes locked on the parchment. The leader's face twisted with panic. "Don't," he shouted, but Clara was already moving, pulling a match from her pocket, striking it against her boot. The flame caught, and the map burned, its edges curling black, the spiral sigil vanishing into ash. The Guardians screamed, a sound that wasn't human, wasn't animal, but something ancient and furious. They lunged, but Clara was ready, her revolver firing, each shot finding its mark. The Guardians fell, one by one, their bodies dissolving into the wind, their growls fading into silence. The leader was alone now, his pistol shaking in his hand. "You idiot," he snarled. "You don't know what you've done." Clara's revolver was empty, but she didn't need it. She stepped forward, her knife drawn, her eyes burning with a fury she hadn't felt since the fire that took her sister. "I know exactly what I've done," she said. "I'm ending this." She moved faster than he expected, her knife flashing, and the leader fell, his throat slit, his eyes wide with shock. Clara stood over him, her chest heaving, the match still burning in her hand until the last of the map was gone, its ashes scattering across the plains. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Elias's ragged breathing and the distant sound of the river. Clara turned to him, her arm bleeding, her heart pounding. "You still alive?" she asked. "Barely," he said, managing a weak grin. "You're something else, Voss." She helped him to his feet, her eyes scanning the horizon. The Guardians were gone, the riders were dead, but the Cheyenne camp was still there, its fires a promise of safety. She led Elias toward the river, her steps steady despite the pain, her mind fixed on Leela. They reached the camp as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and hope. Hannah was there, Leela beside her, surrounded by Cheyenne warriors whose faces were stern but not hostile. The warrior with the painted face, the one who'd saved them in the canyon, stepped forward, his eyes meeting Clara's. "You burned it," he said, his voice carrying a mix of relief and respect. "The hollow is safe." Clara nodded, her hand resting on Lila's shoulder. "It's over." The warrior studied her, then gestured to the camp. "Rest, heal. The girl is yours now." Clara looked down at Leela, whose eyes were red with tears but bright with something new, hope, maybe, or the beginnings of healing. "You're safe," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. "I promised." Leela threw her arms around Clara, her small body shaking with sobs, and Clara held her tight, feeling the weight of her promise lift, replaced by something warmer, something alive. Elias watched, his face pale but his eyes soft, and for the first time, Clara saw something like peace in them. The Cheyenne gave them food, water, a place to rest. Elias's wounds would heal, though he'd carry the scars for life. Clara's arm was bandaged, her pain dulled by the knowledge that Leela was safe. The map was gone, the hollow hidden, the Guardians silent. But as Clara sat by the fire, Leela asleep beside her, she knew the frontier wasn't done with her. There were other secrets, other promises, other fights waiting in the dust of forgotten trails. For now, though, she had Leela, and that was enough. Months later, Clara and Leela stood outside a small cabin on the edge of the plains. Its walls sturdy, its chimney smoking gently. Elias had stayed with the Cheyenne, his strength returning, his secrets his own. Clara had built this place with her own hands, a home for Leela, a place to heal. The girl was stronger now, her eyes brighter, her laughter a sound Clara hadn't known she needed until it filled her life. But sometimes, at night, when the wind howled across the plains, Clara heard a faint growl, a whisper of something ancient, something not quite gone. She kept her rifle close, her knife sharper, and her promise to Leela unbreakable. The frontier was a hard place, but it was hers, and she'd fight for it, for Leela, for the hope they'd carved from the dust. If you've been gripped by Clara's journey, her fight to protect Leela, and the secrets of the hollow, share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have burned the map or opened the door? And if you love this tale of survival and redemption, subscribe for more stories from the wild frontier, where every choice is a battle and every promise is a lifeline.